Hello everybody, we're going to be doing chapter 10 of Tsotsi by Athol Fugard today. Tsotsi opened his eyes and listened to the knocking on his door, instinctively, but for no other reason than having awoken. He put his hand under his pillow to find his knife. Before he found it, another thought crossed his mind, and he sat up on his elbows and looked down to the foot of the bed. The baby was still there, and apparently asleep. The knocking had stopped, but now it came again. Tsotsi shook his head. He must have fallen asleep. Sometime in the night his tiredness must have caught up with him, and he had fallen asleep. No, it was in the morning. He remembered going out once to piss and hearing cocks crowing and noticing the sky was pale. How long had he slept? He looked at the window and listened. Bright light and casual noise. Early morning. The knocking started again. Who was that? Suddenly he thought about the woman, the one he had got to feed the baby. Why her? Why would she come back? Tsotsi shook his head again. Things were happening, and thoughts were coming too fast for him. He felt for his knife, but did exactly the opposite of what it was meant to do. Instead of pacifying him, it started a new sequence of thoughts. He remembered the river again, the gangs, then his mother, then Peter. The person outside knocked again. "Who are you?" Tsotsi called out. The woman. Could it be the woman? Why the woman? Silence. No one answering. A motor car cruised past in the street. Vague voices somewhere. Who is there? He was halfway to the door when Diop answered. "Tsotsi, is that you?" Tsotsi stopped and listened. "This is me," Diop added. Jesus, what now? What the hell now? Things were happening too fast. "What do you want?" No answer. "Diop? It's me. Ja, Diop. Hey." Tsotsi gently hid the baby under the bed before opening the door. Diop smiled. Where's his front teeth? Tsotsi thought. And then, why the hell am I thinking that? "I did think you weren't here," Diop was saying. "What's the time?" "Morning. Can't you see?" He was still smiling. "What do you want?" The smile went, slowly flowing away like thick oil. Diop sighed at the same time and dropped his eyes and put his hands on his hips. "Yes, it's morning," he said, ignoring the other question. "Or thereabouts." "What do you want?" "I just come, man." "For what?" "Hell!" He whistled a few flat notes. Don't I just always come?" he asked eventually. "Where else do I go? Hey?" "Nowhere, man. I just come here." "Well, don't." Tsotsi closed the door in his face and went to his bed and sat down. A few seconds later, Diop's head appeared at the window. He tried to whistle again, but gave it up. "Why?" he asked. Tsotsi repeated the question for him. Yes, why? My mother, he thought, my father, the bitch, the river, a spider spinning a web. But most of all, my mother. He had to return to that thought. Everything started there. It was the beginning of himself and of his memories, spanning like silk thread out of a soft shimmer of her humming on a day long, long forgotten. Was it true? Was it really true? Had it been him? My mother, he said aloud. The words were strong and full of meaning, and a clear image formed in his mind. Had he looked when he would have seen Diop's eyes widen at the window. There was a thought, if ever there was one. Tsotsi's mother. Your mother. Mine is dead. You knew her, not yours. Mine. She died. Tsotsi looked at Diop. It was strange. He had never realized it before. Every man had a mother. Every single person in the world had a mother. Boston, too. Jesus, what about Boston? He would get around to that. And Diop. And Butcher. Where is Butcher? Gone. He won't come. Diop was resting his chin on the windowsill. His head bobbed as he spoke, but I did. Tsotsi considered this. Butcher gone, Boston gone, the gang finished, just like that, finished. Himself thinking it was like that. One word. Finished. What now, another gang? Could there be another one? Why not? Since the river. But what about before the river? He was fed up about Saturday, Diop continued. He said you'd done a job alone. Saturday night and the cripple. We come here on Sunday morning, but you wasn't here. Sunday morning and the ants. We come back in the afternoon, but we heard a woman here. The woman who had fed the baby. Yeah, maybe you did, Tsotsi said suddenly. Maybe there was a woman here. Maybe I done a job alone. So what? That's what I tell him, Tsotsi. All along I've been saying maybe, and when he says this morning to let us go join up with Buster and his boys, I says maybe, but he finds a bloody long word, man, and goes. So what are you doing here? I come here. Why don't you go with him? 2 years, Tsotsi. What's 2 years? We been together. Tsotsi looked at Diop. He blinked a few times as if it would clear his vision of habit, of the muzziness that came from seeing the same thing so much until you saw it no more. 2 years, and he's got no front teeth, and 2 years. Strong, the strongest. 2 years he stayed and followed me like a dog follows a man. So we start again, Tsotsi. Hey, man. It was like this, listen. Then. So we find a couple of others and we start again, and the baby started crying. For a moment Diop was fooled and he looked back over his shoulder. Then he realized the sound was coming from the room, from under the bed on which Tsotsi was sitting. He opened his mouth to say something, and then realized that Tsotsi hadn't moved when it started, hadn't even registered that he'd heard the sound, just sitting there, watching them. Diop closed his mouth and pretended he hadn't heard a thing. It cried for a few minutes. Diop tried to whistle again, looked up at the ceiling, the floor, then all the walls. Tsotsi was thinking, start again, since the river. But what about before the river? The baby stopped suddenly. No, Arp, you're wrong. We don't start again. No, it's finished. Me, finished, man, like breakfast, or yesterday, or Boston. Finished cold. So what do I do? Go. Where? I don't care. Okay. He waited for a few minutes longer, and in that time they stared at each other. Once more Diop tried to whistle, but failed. Then he left, neither having said another word. Tsotsi went to the window and watched him walk down the street. He looks drunk, he thought. He walks drunk. What do I care? He had said finished. What did that mean? What was finished? like breakfast and yesterday in Boston. Maybe he was dead. Jesus, what about Boston? Maybe he, Tsotsi, would be too late. Wait, wait, man. His time is coming, is near. Finished? With songs? What else was there? What else had there ever been? Only one day a long, long time ago before the river. But what the hell was finished? He had said it. He had said it himself. The baby cried again. Tsotsi went back and brought it out from under the bed. For the first time since the night in the grove of bluegum trees, when fate forced it into his hands, he was glad he had it. He rejoiced in the very things that had disgusted and angered him in the past, like its smell, its wizened ugliness, its crying, the raucous yell of noise that came unendingly out of its black hole of a mouth. Everything about it that touched, or could be touched by one of his senses, gave him satisfaction. This was reality, to be heard, to be felt, to be smelt. This was no phantom from his past that came like a dream, remembered after many years, and yet it seemed real. He could hold this baby in his hands. It was real now, and it was beginning of 3 strange days, and it was still with him, and crying and wanting milk and things. Its function, that moment, went beyond giving him a hold on an actual moment of the living, urgent present. He had become the repository of Tsotsi's past. The baby and David, himself that is, at first confused, and now merged into one and the same person. The police raid, the river, and Peter, the spider spinning his web, the grey day and the smell of damp newspapers were a future awaiting the baby. It was outside itself. He could sympathize with it in its defenselessness against the terrible events awaiting it. Not irrelevantly, because despite the old woman's visit, the baby looked worse than ever. He thought of death. What if it died? Then he, Tsotsi, would have to take the past back. And what could he do with it? What could he, in his life, in that room, do with a day long, long time ago, and a woman humming, and a little boy happy with cotton reels on the floor? Stay alive, he said aloud. Stay alive, David. I'll get you mother's milk. When some time later Miriam's genie took her place in the water queue, Tsotsi was waiting at his window, standing so that he could watch her without being seen. He noticed that she looked back at his room many times, and he wondered if it meant that it was going to be easier to get her. She decided that it did, because there wasn't much fear in the way she moved, or in her face when she looked back. It was a furtive, quick turn of the head when she bent to pick up her bucket, and a move few steps forward. After each look she lapsed into an absent mood, and seemed to think deep and not to notice anything around her. Then it was her turn at the tap, and when her bucket was full, she started on the way back. Tsotsi had also had time to notice many other things that he had missed the previous day, like the strong slant to her eyes, and the ochre tint of her skin, which was not black like most of the others. She stood straight, and although not very tall, she looked it because of the way she carried her body, walking well, with a full roll in her hips. One baby had not marked her, or if any, only turned a girl into a woman. The moment of ripening, they said in the township. You only speak of a tree after picking its first fruit. When she was still a distance away, he left the window and went to the door, opening and stepping outside, and then just standing there where she could see him. She came a few more steps and pretended to be tired, putting down her bucket. She wasted a few more seconds by fiddling with the blanket that held the baby to her back, bending forward from the waist while doing so. It was in this position, with a safety pin between her white teeth, that she looked up suddenly and Tsotsi caught her eye. He held it no longer and looked deeper than he had done with anyone else in his life, making sure in that time that she understood that his baby was waiting in the room again and that he was asking her. He waited for her to pick up her bucket and start walking. When she had come within a few steps of him, he turned and went into the room. He wasn't sure she had followed until the room darkened, and then he knew that she was in the doorway. Even so, he did not look back, but went straight to the bed. "He's been crying," he said. "He looks bad. I got nothing for him. You will feed him again?" Silhouetted in the door, with the light behind her, he could see nothing of her face. He didn't need to. The hesitation was obvious, and he was about to say something else, something maybe about her baby, that would make her decide when she finally came in and closed the door. After the glare, it took him a few seconds to accustom his eyes to the dark. When he could see her clearly, she was already at the bed, loosening the blanket that held her child. He knew then that she had wanted to come, that she had come prepared to come, that for all he knew she might have knocked on his door in passing if he had not stopped out into the street. He knew that firstly, because of the ointment she smeared around the sore lips, dipping her finger into a small jar that had come out of a pocket in her dress. There were also clean clothes come out of the blanket to clothe it, and the powder she dusted over the small baby. In all this, the ointment, the washing, and the clothing, her own baby cried once, but she silenced it with soft words, bending low so it could smell her presence. Then she unbuttoned her blouse. It was the same one with the buttons sewn on again, and she started feeding, and this he watched intently, because he had not seen it the first time. Her breasts were big and full of milk, and they started dripping even before she had a nipple in the small mouth. The baby gave her trouble. After sucking for a few seconds, with a loud, greedy noise, he then turned his head, and the milk dribbled out of the corner of his mouth. She bounced him for a few seconds on her lap, rubbing his back all the time, and then tried again. The same thing happened. "Little one, what is the matter? You must drink. Look at you. I siehst doch. Just look. What is your name? Drink, my baby. What will we call you? Peter, the big fisherman. Drink, Peterkie." "His name is David." Miriam looked at Tsotsi. "Are you his father?" "His father?" "A big, feathered man, flying them away to better times." Our David, he thought. Poor David. There were no better times, just the river. Tsotsi closed his eyes. "David," he said, and he was shocked to hear the hard sound of the word. Never saw his father. Miriam clicked out her sympathy. Anyway, she knew his real name now and could speak to him. Tsotsi listened. They weren't words, just sounds. Soft woman sounds that took him back again. His mother. What the hell does a man do with a mother? Was it really so? Had it really been him? "Give him to me." The baby was drinking deeply. He caught his breath and waited. It was the woman speaking. "Give him to me. He is sick. Give him to me and I will take him and look after him." He thought of his knife first. I will kill her, here in this room, she and her child. I will kill them fucking dead. I can feed it, she was saying. I have good milk. I know about babies. Then he thought about the baby. I gave him milk. Me on a Saturday in a shop. I bought it. I killed the ants. The woman spoke on. You can see him. You can come to my room and see him, and he will get big and strong like my child. They will play together. Simon and David. Give him to me. A long time passed like that. He never spoke, and she only once, to the baby, when she changed to the other breast. It's empty, he thought. One tit is empty. Then he drifted off into his own thoughts again. He remembered the river. He always returned to the river. For all its being dry and littered with rubbish, it flowed unceasingly through his mind because it was the beginning. They had played one game. It was the game of the rusty shell and the old motor car that had crashed into the river one night, and by their time had been stripped clean so that all that remained was the frame, gaping socketed like a skull. The game was called Driving to Hell and Gone. It was intricate to play and involved filling up with petrol and water, testing the tires and oil, loading the luggage in the boot, and then all climbing in and driving away very fast. The best part was being the driver, and they took turns at that. Beep, beep, toot, toot, ah, ah, ah. Somehow they had always seemed to play it late in the afternoon in the fading light. The rule was that only the driver made the noises. The rest sat silent while he raced the gloom of evening, which always fell first there in the riverbed. Beep, beep, ah, ah, ah. There was an uncanny sensation of speed and danger as darkness settled and the shadows lengthened, and the others held their breath, running away to hell and gone. Mistaking Tsotsi's silence for consideration, Miriam spoke on. He needs milk. He needs it more than you think. I'm telling you, this boy David is sick. He may die. What do you know? But I will take him because yesterday I was jealous about my milk, and it was wrong, and feeding him makes me happy. Tsotsi wasn't hearing her any more. She gave him to me. Under the trees, she gave to me. Nobody can take him away. He is mine. He is mine. She had put the baby down on the bed beside hers, and was standing open. Her blouse hung open. In her excitement, she had forgotten her modesty. Look at them. I'll tell you something. Last night I was sad, and I bent on my knees and did pray for something, and a voice said, why should I give you what you ask me for, when you got no milk for babies? Please give him to me. He is mine, Tsotsi finally said, glad that the words came so easily and did not fall over each other in their hurry to get out. But you are not his father, she said. He is mine. There was no arguing with the finality in his voice, yet for a long time Miriam remained standing at the table, bent slightly forward as to see Tsotsi clearly. He is mine, he said again, and then she moved, dropping her head first, then going back to the bed, where she sat, righted her blouse and watched the sleeping babies. Where did you get him? He was given to me, he said. Where? She asked, impatient with his insistence. Under the trees. And the mother? She ran away in the night. The woman looked at him, a frown between her eyes. She ran away in the night, he said, making his words as big as he could. shaping them massively with his hands as they came out. She didn't cry for him. She didn't give him no milk. She got him in a box, and she gave him to me, and she just ran away in the night. Tell me, the woman said. I just told you. Tell me more, she insisted. So he started again, from the beginning, telling some things many times until he remembered something else. Miriam listening through it all with a frown and patience. Telling without shame how he had seen her coming through the night with the box, and had waited for her, and how he was left holding the baby. He stopped there, because what followed was still beyond words, and of no interest to her. When did it happen? She asked. He counted back the days. 3. She shook her head and clicked her tongue softly, so when he went on about the milk and feeding it and the ants. She was watching him carefully when he reached the end. His eyes were excited, and his hands trembling, because never before had he spoken so many words at once. What are you going to do with him? Keep him? Why? He threw back his head, and she saw the sign of desperation on his forehead as he struggled with that one mighty word. Why? Why was he? No more revenge, no more hate. The riddle of the yellow bitch was solved. All of this in a few days, and in a shorter time the hold on his life by the blind, black, minute hands had grown tighter. Why? Because I must find out, he said. She considered this, but finding her thoughts going around in a circle, she turned to the baby again. She uncovered a medicine bottle of milk in her blanket and put it on the table. Give him this tomorrow, she said, with a spoon. I will come in the afternoon at the same time. Then it was the business again with the blanket, and her own baby with her safety pin between her teeth. She straightened, picked up her bucket, and went to the door. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. And she went out. He gave her time enough to reach her room, and then he picked up the baby and slipped it into the street, and then up to the ruins. But even so, he looked back twice on the way in case she had hidden somewhere and was following him. After hiding the baby, he set off purposefully in the opposite direction from which he had come. It was a long walk, and it took him right through the township, reaching his destination towards the middle of the afternoon. Tsotsi found he couldn't control himself. His heart raced, and strange sounds broke from his lips as he ran down the footpath to the bottom of the river. It was true. The pipes were exactly as he remembered them, choked with dry leaves and sand now, smelling rusty. The only change was that more rubbish seemed to have been thrown or blown into the riverbed. He hurried down it. When he found the shell of a motor car, almost as he remembered it, there was no longer any doubt. It was true. It had happened, and to him. He didn't stay a second longer than was necessary, almost running in his hurry to leave the river. Once he got back among the houses and the people, he slowed down. It was dark when he reached his street, and he slipped into the first shebeen to ask after the whereabouts of Boston.